pick me up. I'm like, I'm picking you up today. I got an appointment. Besides that, you can ride the bus. It's free.
Oh, she has a UAA student. Bus is free for 10-year-olds?
Yeah.
No kidding.
School bus.
Oh, the school bus.
Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say. How those things work.
Well, if they had a hole in the fence over there, she'd probably walk there in about 2 minutes, but say they go all the way around it.
I broke the computer.
Uh-oh.
Okay, so I didn't break it. It just got a severe case of the slows. I guess the Russians are trying to get in.
Probably. Right after the governor had his meeting over there, a bunch of systems here in Alaska got hacked by the Chinese government. Like,
Now they were in the middle of shaking hands, and meanwhile,
yeah.
The Chinese, it's getting crazier and crazier. Trying to run into us in their own Navy destroyers, saying it's an accident, but not really. Same time.
They did it on purpose.
Yeah,
oh, yeah. So I'll get started, even though we might still have. We actually have 2 minutes, so, but I'll start. This is actually an exciting day, mostly because of Hegel, but just as I did with Rousseau and Kant, I kind of split the first day on Kant with Rousseau, and ended up just spending the whole day on Rousseau. Sorry about that. The whole class time. In this case, Mary is the article in the text just prior to Hegel, so I thought, well, okay, hats off to Mary. The vindication of the rights of women is the big article that we have in the text. I don't think you could possibly say she was like the first feminist. Who the heck was the first feminist? I mean, the ancient Greeks had plenty. I think I always love mentioning Hypatia. She's really quite impressive, especially if you like the movie Agora. But of course, that's the actress, not Hypatia. I have no clue what Hypatia might have looked like before her skin was scraped off by the Christian crowd who wanted to kill the liberal atheists among them. But Mary suffered through her life. She had miserable health. And part of it, of course, is that having children one after the other was the way of things. One of which became at least as famous. What? Did you see what that said? It said restart needed.
We wait. It doesn't need to update now.
Right now, but Mary Shelley actually was it Mary Shelley? I think, right? Yeah, Mary Shelley. This is her daughter, and Mary. Shelley because she married Pierce Bysshe Shelley, the famous poet, British poet. And then she wrote the book Frankenstein. So if you're not familiar with that, which is considered like the classic example of a Gothic novel. And of course, apart from the idea of creating a monster and how it terrorized the community. It actually brought up lots of interesting questions about what a person is, and the rights of persons. So there's all kinds of stuff you could do with that Gothic novel. But she died, Mary Wollstonecraft died shortly after having the daughter that became Mary Shelley. She died at the age of 38, 11 days after giving birth to her second daughter. So that's not very good as far as lifelong. So, it's kind of interesting, of course, that today they're pressing forward with voting for Kavanaugh, despite the emphasis that a lot of women have put on rejecting him because of his behavior when he was a teenager.
Supposed behavior.
Supposed
But it
behavior.
hasn't proven anything.
Yeah.
Only in accusations have been presented.
I like the way my wife puts it. She believes both of them. She totally believes both of them. The fact is that they're both seeing things from different eyes.
Someone has to be wrong.
Well, when it comes to perspectives, both.
I mean, she could have possibly been raped. Could possibly be true, but...
Well, actually, she doesn't say she was raped, but
Oh, sexually assaulted.
yeah.
Okay.
It was the other person who didn't really blame him, but blamed those kinds of parties for her being raped multiple times or whatever.
Yeah. Well, she
But
kept
then-
going to the parties.
Right.
So
And
it's
it turns
like-
out that she actually still likes those parties,
Yeah.
apparently. So she's not there to complain about those parties. She's there to be a character witness to the kinds of people that went to those parties, which makes you wonder, well, really, is she talking about Judge Kavanaugh or her?
Some other kid.
Well, yeah, apparently.
Yeah.
So I gather you can, have been at the party, thought it was just fun, and at the same time, someone else at the party thought it was, horrible, or so yeah, two people at the same party can have totally different impressions of the party.
I got this on Facebook. I don't know if it's true. One person was saying that a friend of hers confided that the Ford lady admitted that she had over 64 partners from the time she was 15 all the way on up through college. I'm like, most people don't make it that far.
I haven't asked them.
So,
I've had friends
and
that are
then what is a
absolutely
15-year-old
appalled at
doing at a
the few experiences I've had.
alcoholic, intoxicated party? So there's lots of, whether you hear one side or the other, or believe one or the other, there's lots of gray area in there where there's no facts. It's just hearsay and accusations of hearsay.
Yeah, well, even Ford's friends, like, I don't know Kavanaugh, and I never saw him at any of the parties they went to. So it's like your old friend admitting that he was never there at the parties you went to. So it kind of stinks when you have your own friend basically kind of against you. That's also supporting you at the same time.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, well,
Oops.
put the king to it. Yeah, it's supposed to be your eye.
I didn't mean to tell the truth there.
I care for you, but I'm not gonna lie.
Well, I'm gonna throw this in. I forget, did I mention Identity by Francis Fukuyama already? Maybe I have. Maybe not. I can share the.
And the other thing is this Ford lady is very closely associated with all the other shenanigans going on with the Russian probe, you know. And then one person was saying that Kavanaugh's mother was a judge, and that's the person who caused the Ford lady's mother to lose her home. She didn't pay a bill or something like that. So there's almost like a revenge plot.
Complex.
Conflicts of interest there.
So, as you can see, that's this book. Looks pretty clear. And if I usually mention this, what I would say first is how he starts it at the preface by saying, this book would not have been written had Donald J. Trump not been elected president in November 2016.
Yeah.
So that's what triggered his writing this. And by the way, it's the shortest book he's ever written as far as I recall.
The typeface looks very small.
And it's written to a different audience. Most of the text that he's written before, dense tones. I'm sure he doesn't mind my saying that. It's just true. And I clicked. It should be doing something. So, like these two are the latest. Political Order and Political Decay was the one he wrote before this one. The Origins of Political Order is like volume 1 of that 2-volume set. Although the first one goes like through history, describing how governments developed. And I thought the second one was going to pick up after or during the French Revolution, but instead it turned out to be kind of an analysis of government in general, so it didn't follow with like a continuous history as I expected. Most famous book that he's known for is The End of History and the Last Man, which was right after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and lots of people make fun of him because acts like he's suggesting this is the end of history now. But what he means by that is really a Hegelian concept. The goal of history, you might call it, instead. You know, what is you know, the end result of what history is evolving towards, if you can, you know, decide that. And Hegel, by the way, argues that it's like a story. You know, if you're going to analyze history, you've got to describe it in terms of a narrative. And what's the narrative? You know, what's the climactic goal of the narrative? Increasing freedom for human beings. And how is that described and so on? How can governments gradually give more and more people more and more freedom, etc. And by the way, Hegel does predict that the United States would be the next historical development that way, where freedom would expand to more people. And he predicted that before he died, obviously, in 1831, so that's pretty way back, right, you know, when you think how that works. But all of these books are much bigger than this one, and written to really a much different audience. And one of the ways of noticing that is the paucity of footnotes in this book. The other one, you know, when you're reading it, a major portion of the book are the footnotes, which you've got to like keep simultaneous bookmarkers so that as you're reading, if you read the footnotes, you could quickly get to the next one and so on. This one I'm you know, looking at, and the amount of footnotes it's almost like an afterthought, because I think he just wrote the book in like a blur of activity, you know, instead of the kind of normal research. So you could tell he's kind of just using his overwhelming memory to just quickly put this together. And the theme is identity, and it is a Hegelian issue. So, for example, just in the preface here, I'm looking at page XV, 15. Right? Demand for recognition of one's identity is a master concept that unifies much of what is going on in world politics today. It is not confined to the identity politics practiced on university campuses or to the white nationalism it has provoked, but extends to broader phenomena such as the upsurge of old-fashioned nationalism and politicized Islam. Much of what passes for economic motivation is, I will argue, actually rooted in the demand for recognition, what the French refer to as le regard, based on Hegel's philosophy, and therefore cannot simply be satisfied by economic means. This has direct implications for how we should deal with populism in the present. According to Hegel, human history was driven by a struggle for recognition. He argued that the only rational solution to the desire for recognition was universal recognition, in which the dignity of every human being was recognized. Universal recognition has been challenged ever since by other partial forms of recognition based on nation, religion, sect, race, ethnicity, or gender. And so when we look at the Kavanaugh thing, I read an absolutely wonderful diagnosis of that, posted by a friend. It wasn't her writing, but she shared it. You know how Facebook is. Let's see if I can find it. Why? Every time I log in anymore, it's asking me all this stuff instead of remembering who I am. Why does it do that? Is this security now because of Facebook was hacked, etc.?
Yeah.
It could be.
It's annoying like this. I'm surprised I actually remember. Well, okay, that will help. What does that mean? No, I don't want to do that. I don't even have other devices really. So what I want is Jen Everett, who by the way taught philosophy here. Notice she's now at DePaul University, not here. So this is what I read that she had posted that I thought was really pretty good. She doesn't write it, Jen, but she's sharing. I think, and I'm sure it should be, I understand now why I am so upset about this case, the Kavanaugh thing. I tried to sleep last night, and all I kept thinking is, why are they trying to ram him through despite the majority of the country and the majority of women saying no, and please stop and wait? And in that very question I found the answer. It was so simple and so alarming. They are literally playing out on the national stage and in real time what it feels like to be overpowered. They won't take no for an answer. They won't listen or slow down. They won't stop. The more we say no, the more angry they get. The more we ask them to stop, the more entitled they feel. This is, I think, is what is affecting me and countless other women. We are being overpowered despite us being in the majority and asking rightfully that they stop or wait. They are saying no, and the more we beg, the more aggressive they are getting, until finally they plan on ramming through his nomination while we are supposed to just take it. This is what is affecting me. This is, I think, what is affecting most women. this overpowering, entitled, and demeaning attack on our body politic. Us, please stop. Them, no. Us, wait. Them, no. Us, stop. Them, no. Us, crying. Get the idea? I thought that was one way of seeing how this whole thing is. You know, this is like the same thing in a national sense as opposed to at the party. So I thought, wow, that's kind of interesting. But so, you know, when Fukuyama analyzes things through a Hegelian perspective, and by the way, all of his works have always heavily emphasized Hegel, etc. And I have a bias. I love Hegel too, and so whenever I read someone who keeps referring to Hegel, I'm like, yes, you know, with the kind of the Snoopy dance. You know how I guess Snoopy is supposed to. But he is highly honored by all sorts of folks too. But
what gets me is, if indeed he did do what she said she did, why has she not filed charges and the police in the jurisdiction of where it happened? And then it no longer is a political issue, it's a legal and civil issue between them two. Not the Supreme Court, not the FBI. all that
notice,
stuff.
by the way, that there are only 4 of us here at the moment.
Yeah.
All of us, as far as I know, are males,
Yeah.
appear to be males.
I do identify as male.
Yes, yeah, so there you go. That's not even borderline males. You know, we're all full into maledom. And whenever I've been in a conversation concerning this topic, and it's males tend to support him and feel like this is basically a frivolous charge, just as some of the senators, the Republican senators, defended it, saying this is all just a political hit job, trumped up. They shouldn't. No, they wouldn't have said that. They wouldn't have said that. But you know, they would take Trump's tact on this and attack and say, you know, these are untrustworthy people. They're basically just doing whatever they can to keep this honorable, decent, excellent judge from becoming the Supreme Court justice he's been fated to be. You know, so this is, that's the kind of conversation you hear, males talk about, and then the female in the back of the room chirps up and says, you know, and although in English, you know, and
Not so long.
and so it clearly feels like this is a perspective issue, and I'm biased because of who I am. You guys are too. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, you can't not have a bias. That's a contemporary way of viewing things, which basically is a Hegelian view, by the way, which we really should get into, because as we read the text, and it's famous, this is the beginnings of self-consciousness that we have. It's from Hegel's text, the phenomenology of, Geist, which in German means, in English might mean spirit, might mean mind, depending on your translation. And by the way, that's exactly how things have happened. Of some of the translations of the text, the very first one by Bailey, translated as mind, so it's the phenomenology of mind. The Miller, which was considered by many to be a much better text, that still has been around for quite some time. translated it as the phenomenology of spirit. So if you see phenomenology of mind, phenomenology of spirit, so it's the study of the phenomena of really our consciousness, our self-consciousness, and that at multiple levels. And so as we're reading the text, and by the way, there's some newer translations altogether of it today. So new. I mean, two of them just came out this year, actually. One by Stephen Pinkard, which is probably one that I ought to read because I've read all of Pinkard's books too on Hegel and philosophy of that time period. He's a specialist in the German philosophy of that time period. But so the phenomenology of spirit, we'll call it that, doesn't mean some eerie, mystical thing, but instead maybe we could call it culture and your self-consciousness. Right? So he describes it by talking about how it begins. And initially, a child has no self-consciousness. Assume. Can't really, of course, know. There's all kinds of new things, of course, that we know about what a child's experiencing, even though Hegel, of course, dying when he did, had no idea we were going to have these kinds of abilities to see into the brain and what biochemical things are going on and everything. But he establishes the idea of particular periods that the infant is going through. And he calls the first one the period where you're becoming familiar with your mother. And she's the one that rescues you from discomforts of various sorts. And the smiling face of your mother is very reassuring, and her breast is where your nutrition comes from, and all that. And so he refers to this as a period of sense security. So in a sense, you have sense certainty, he calls it, but it's you feel like you're being reassured, and that's and hopefully, of course, if you're being starved to death because of the environment and mom can't handle you, horrible things. He's obviously talking about what would be a typical healthy development. And so you go through this stage, and then you reach what he considers to be the terrible twos. We all call them that. It's kind of interesting. And why is that? It's because that's where the child reaches a stage now where the mind is developed enough to imagine the opposite of whatever, right? So basically, this is when the child can say no. And that's a wonderful thing to explore. Mom says, whatever, and you say no. Because what you're learning how to use the negative. And by the way, that's an incredibly important part of what begins here too. The French have picked up on, so for example, when Sartre writes his big book, Being and Nothingness, L'être et le néant, right? The nothing, right? Is this ability of human beings to say no, to negate, right? And Sartre does a great job with this because notice, by the way, that means Hegel is absolutely essential reading to understand Sartre. But when Sartre's talking about the ability to say no, to him, that's something that's not a physical causative event in what we think of as the scientific physical universe, right? Where does this ability to say no come from, right? It's he thinks unique to humans, although that's kind of odd. I've asked dogs to come in the house, and they clearly look at you and say no, right? You know, because they can imagine not coming in pretty easily. But the idea that, you know, you can imagine the negation of something, tables can't imagine the negation of anything, right? You know, if we develop AI, artificial intelligence, to the point where we think it's now comparative to human thinking, will it have the ability to, out of no place, seemingly, imagine not? You know, unless we program it, of course. Are we programmed to say no? Is that where that comes from? Is that a universal human characteristic? When I think of the last quiz question, you know, is there a universal human characteristic? Hegel will argue for several things, right? Some of which I think is probably wrong. And that is the idea of us to go to this next stage then, and that is to have self-consciousness. And so as you're reading that, it's a dialectical interplay of forces. And so what's happening is the individual is in conflict with another individual. And you think, well, wait a minute. And this is the question practically every analysis of the text will bring up, is which two individuals are we talking about? And the answer seems to be multiple. So it's an abstract conflict between two individuals. And one of those individuals I imagine being me, myself, and I, where I'm now self-conscious. And what does that mean? It means that there's two of me, and the one is aware of the other of me. Otherwise, what are you talking about? You know, you can't be self-aware. So I have a subjective side, which, of course, Kant had talked about, Hume had talked about. So you've got this subjective side of us that's having the experience. But guess what? I can hold an image of myself there. So to some extent, Hume is wrong. You know, I do have a mirror image self that I know that's me. And for Hume to say, well, no, it isn't. Well, of course, that's because one of them is the object of myself that I'm holding before me, and the other one is the self that's viewing that self, right? So I have a dialectical engagement going on between more than one self, which gives me the ability to have a self-awareness, right? And all consciousness, or that becomes self-consciousness, goes through this stage. So if there's a universal human characteristic, it must be that we're all at the stage where we become self-conscious. We have two sides of ourselves, the subjective side and the objective side. And these, in German, are the an sich, the in itself, and the für sich, the for itself. So the in itself is the subjective side, the for itself is the self for the in itself, right? So how I imagine myself. So when I say I'm Bill Jamison, 206-428-256, yeah, I just gave my social security number, I should. Well, you know.
I don't remember it.
Yeah, well, but it's recorded now,
Oh.
and so I just broadcasted it to all the Russians in the world. Ha ha ha.
You can edit it out, right?
No.
Oh.
I can, actually. I've never done that, though. And I don't care. I'm probably the only one that's going to watch it. Except, well, who knows? Alex and Amy might watch it. Hannah might watch it. But so I'm imagining myself. When I say I'm Bill Jamison, I've learned that that's me. actually was one of the most traumatic experiences in my life, because I was always Billy. All my life I was Billy, and I go to first grade, and in first grade there's 50 of us all sitting around in our school uniforms, our ties, and Sister Mary Immaculate is calling out the roll for the first time, and she's calling all these kids, and they're all there, except for this one kid, William Jamison. And we're all sitting there wondering, who the heck is this stupid kid that doesn't even know his own name? And she finally figured out who wasn't already named, and she came up to me and she looked right at me and she said, "Are you William Jamison?" And I said, "No, sister, my name is Billy." And she said, "You're William." I was horrified. What the heck? You know. Well, I got home and I said to my mom, "She called me William." And my mother laughed and said, "You are William." And I was like, what? What kind of trauma? You know, first day of school.
Yeah.
I was the stupid one, right? You know, that's another problem there. You know, who's the stupid kid? Me.
Well, it's like how many young kids like that actually know the names of their moms and dads. They say mom and dad.
Right. Well, but so I learned who I was because of society giving me these names, characteristics, short, ugly, you know, all those things. Old retired army, you know, whatever. No, I learned that from the interplay of forces, from this dialectical process, give and take with others. And if I make a mistake and say I'm John, everyone says, "What? No, you're not." You know. So it's not up to me to just totally be creative and call myself who I am. Although some people get away with it, at least for a while. Catch Me If You Can. I don't know if you've heard about that movie or the guy that did that. But so it's not just me. It's this dialectical interplay with others that gives me the concepts that then I hold in my mind as that's me. Right? So I have all these definitions of me that society agrees. You know, the IRS agrees with the Social Security number. My wife agrees that I'm Mr. married to Mrs., etc. All of those things are in my conceptual schema of who I am. Now, we also today, I think, joke about that being fake. We're all, as Shakespeare says, we're all honest. You know, all the world is a stage and all of us are merely players. We're acting multiple roles. So who am I in this play? Oh, I'm going to be King Richard. So I'm playing a role. Well, you know, the roles are important to me because they define myself, right? You know, and those roles are also created by society. So if society creates a role that says you're a woman, so you're only allowed to stay in the kitchen, you're not allowed shoes, and if you're not pregnant, something's wrong. You know, so you know that's your role. You know, because you're a woman, right? Well, what if I don't want to be barefoot, pregnant, and in the kitchen? Maybe I want to be out riding a horse, or you know, attacking the enemy with my, you know, lightsaber or something. You know, oh no, you're not allowed to do that. You're just a woman. You wouldn't be able to do that, etc. Right? You know, could really irritate me if I grew up wishing that I was a princess. A knight of the round table, Brave. I think of the movie Brave, if you've seen that. That's classic Disney presentation of the young girl who clearly is a girl, but on the other hand outdoes all the guys who are all stupid. You've seen Brave, I guess,
yes.
Right? But so Hegel gives us this as kind of a narrative. This is a story that's happening. So, for example, in this section where self-consciousness appears, self-consciousness is in and for itself. Right? So it's the combination of those two aspects of us, right? This is on page 910, by the way, if you're looking. Self-consciousness is in and for itself, in and through being in and for itself, for another self-consciousness. So, is that absolutely necessary? Can you become self-consciousness? Can you become self-conscious on your own? I don't think so. I think it's a socially programmed event that your parents basically keep telling you that you ought to do this, you should do this, would you like this, etc. They put you, that's how moms and dads talk to you, so that you become aware that you have a choice. Do I want to go to bed now? Yes, you do. Or whatever, right? So I'm aware of another self-consciousness who also has both an in and for itself, right? So there's a dialectical process in your mother as she's thinking about stuff. And she's dialoguing with you, so she's another self-consciousness, and you now have a self-consciousness too, right? So we become aware of ourselves through this interaction with other people, right? It's a social event. That is, it is only as something acknowledged or recognized, and this is the, how are they recognizing me? So the women are furious right now because men treat us like meat. And I can see that because I've been raised to treat women like meat. Sorry about that. I've also been raised to treat them as equals, but that's in conflict with the other. So if I'm supposed to be sexually attracted to them, that makes me think of them as objects. And yet at the same time, and we've got lots of wonderful, powerful sources for this, the true love doesn't think of the loved one as an object for my pleasure, or just looking at the person even is pleasurable, but instead I should think of them as a person like me in themselves and love them for who they are as an equal, right? Which means I shouldn't treat them like meat, right? Well, how do you do that? That's why I think men are in a kind of a crisis too, because to be honest, when you're sitting next to a beautiful woman, it's a pleasant experience, isn't it? Because wow, it's like sugar in my tea. And we know exactly how this works now, thanks to the marvels of science, that when I see a particular shape, etc., my eyes radiate information to my brain, and my brain gets all excited and sends out all sorts of hormonal fireworks that make me feel good just seeing this person. Whereas if I see a pile of shit, I'm like, rah! First you see it, then you say it, right? So I mean, this is all the feeling of what happens. We talk about, how I'm emotional all the time, and all of my behaviors and the phenomena that I'm experiencing literally create biochemical effects in my brain which give me those emotions that are me, right? And you can't deny these. They're there. And yet at the same time, it seems like society's pressuring you not to admit to some of these biochemical reactions that we've been trained. To some extent, we've been trained. To some extent, our bodies are made that way from evolution, because that's how procreation occurs. You're attracted to others that would likely have children by you, so that you can procreate and have more humans, because Lord knows there's not enough of us, you know. Now that hasn't hit us yet either, so that there's some sort of braking mechanism that says, well, if there's this many humans, that's enough. So don't be attracted anymore until next week, maybe. You know, there's a hurricane.
Until there's a vacancy.
And there's a vacancy, yeah. So we become aware of another self-consciousness. That is, it is only as something acknowledged or recognized. So we're looking for that recognition. That's a very important thing. That's why identity politics, etc., is so important, as Fukuyama says. The concept of this unity of self-consciousness in its duplication of the infinitude realizing itself in self-consciousness is a many-sided and many-sensed complex, so that the moments of this complex must both be held carefully apart and at the same time taken and understood in this differentiation as not distinct. So I have these characteristics in me of the subjective side that's having an experience. We should study what that is. That's important. But I also conceive of myself as this for itself. And if I want to understand who I am, I've got to understand that too. So I've got to put both of these under the microscope, so to speak, and analyze them, but not to forget that I am both of these sets of things. I'm not just one or the other. I'm not just the subjective side, as Hume kind of argues, right? I'm actually both the imaginary self that I think of as me. So if I have dreams of what I would like to be, well, that's part of me. Having that as part of my aspirations and so on, right? But at the same time, you know, I'm also the self that's striving for that. And maybe I'll wake up in the morning and not feel good because of the food I ate last night or something. It was too rich, too delicious, and too heavy for my stomach, especially that late at night or whatever, right? And yet, I still, theoretically, would love to absolutely give a great lecture today. So I don't stay home and sit in the chair and feel like, blah. Instead, I get up, do what I can to perk myself up, get outside, and by the way, I'm fine now, because this is such an exciting topic that I'm not worried about the food that I ate last night anymore. It's gone. That's great. But so, yeah, it's all of me, right? And notice that's what he's saying here. And this, by the way, when we think of I should do something with the screen since I put the camera on the screen, and then it's not doing anything. I guess I could put it. I went to this site because you can see Hegel's grave. I'm curious. It's this way, so. So there's his grave in Berlin. Never got to see it in person while I was there because that was in the communist zone. And while we could visit the communist zone, usually we would go like as a bus group, and I couldn't imagine getting a whole bus load of folks interested in going to look at gravestones. They always wanted to go shopping. That was what they went mostly for. But so I just thought I should show that there. There. So now I've got something a little bit more photogenic for the camera, since that's what's Kant gave us this idea of the ego that we can't see because it's numinous, it's not part of phenomena, but it must logically be there. So he transcends the limitation of the phenomena to say what must logically be the case in order for us to have phenomena, and that means there has to be a subjective experiencer that's having the phenomena, following you, right? But we can't actually know it. So the theory of knowledge that Kant is using follows along with the British empiricists in the sense that there's an out there that's causing our experience that we cannot know. And that's really part of our common sense to say that that's the case. You know, I see the wall as it appears to me, not as it is in itself. Right? Well, if you think of it, in order for me to hold that point of view, I have to accept a theory that describes my experience that way. What Hegel does in rebellion to this, and his whole generation is rebelling against this limitation. Schopenhauer does too in his own way, but Hegel's approach to this is to point out that the phenomena itself is all we have. So if I'm looking at the phenomenology of spirit, all of these thoughts that I'm having in my spirit are part of my phenomena. So if I'm conceiving of myself as a self that's invisible to me because it's this the experiencer that can't be viewed, right? That's how it's appearing to me. So I am viewing it. I'm viewing it through my culture, through this theory, through my language. That is the subjective side, as conceived in this dialectical, developing, theoretical philosophy, right? So when we look at the history of philosophy, what we of course see is that, as I've been kind of trying to promote in the classes I teach, this is a very Hegelian point of view, that knowledge progresses. And it's a forward thing. That Plato had some great ideas, Aristotle learned from that and transformed and created new ideas out of those so that you end up with an improved philosophy. And then you go on, of course, still further. You know, just keep improving as you go until, of course, you get to Kant. By the way, a lot of people think of Kant as kind of like Plato, and Hegel is kind of like Aristotle. While Plato is dealing so much with abstract mind explanation, he's kind of the continental rationalist, putting things together. Hegel comes along as kind of the realist. You know, this is the way I really am. And it's not just this abstract structure that just is that way. It's instead a dialectical, dynamic interplay of forces. So instead of the mechanical view of the universe that you get from Descartes on, with Sir Isaac Newton being held in high esteem as being the perfect physicist model of this, it's a clock. You know, the universe is a clock. With Hegel, we get instead an organic model of the universe, which classically is referred to as the oak tree. And it wasn't like Hegel first came up with the importance of an oak tree. In fact, as students, he and his friends planted an oak tree. They called it a liberty tree. And by the way, Americans were planting liberty trees all over too. So this is kind of a popular thing, planting oak trees as liberty trees. And by the way, some of our great liberty trees have been infected with blight and have died, and everyone's all upset because these great trees Some of them have been like damaged by people in parks and so on.
Are people running in with their cars? Like,
It could be two, because some of them are like in the middle of the median on a major route downtown or something. I'm thinking like Tennessee or someplace. I remember. Yeah.
Don't you get fined for hitting like a Liberty tree or something? Just because it is historic.
I think, yeah, it's a protected historic thing. Well, we don't have one in Alaska.
Oaks don't really grow up here too well.
That's right. You could probably grow one in a greenhouse, but I don't know how. But you know, part of the interesting aspect of this is with the mechanical view of the universe, you've got all these parts and they're like perfectly in their places. God created a clock and everything is in its place. But when you think in an organic sense, what you've got is a growing thing that's very difficult for you to decide, okay, what stage is it now? When is it actually an oak tree? You know, it starts off as an acorn. It's kind of silly to call it an oak tree at that point, you know, because it might not even do anything except be eaten, right? You know, but if you do get it planted, you end up with a sapling, you know, then it grows into a small tree, larger tree. Of course, eventually when the oak tree is dead because of whatever, now it's rotting away and feeding, you know, the environment through wood rot, you know, and you know, termites and
Even feeding the new old seeds from the
yeah,
same tree.
yeah. In fact, we're learning more stuff about how trees kind of, mother trees take care of their saplings by transferring some of their nutrients to their roots and stuff. Amazing stuff.
Some of the trees are actually the same tree.
Yeah, that
The
too.
whole forest
That too.
floor is actually the
yeah,
same tree.
it's actually the same tree because of how the roots begin another tree. Well, so you get this dilemma then, which of course is as old as Heraclitus, that how do you say this is the same river? You know, because now it's got different water in it. You know, things have changed. How can you call it the same river? You can't step into the same river twice. You can't call this the same tree twice, because today it's not exactly the same tree. How can I be the same person? Because I'm evolving. So this, by the way, is clearly the evolutionary narrative. Now, Hegel famously never applied it to biology. He applied it to culture, to the spirit, to self. So Hegel's concern is with history evolving, with culture evolving, with the concept of the good evolving, with philosophy evolving. But that will spread and be applied as kind of a new template to other things. So for example, Darwin, actually even Darwin's grandfather, are using this new template and thinking about biology. Of course, Darwin's famous for the actual onset into the media through his book, you know, The Origin of the Species, that evolution is how things are coming about, and that of course conflicts with the typical view that God created everything as it is, right from the get-go. This seems to be a conflict with the traditional Christian narrative. There's of course ways of resolving that. Linguistic or meta-linguistic negotiations will enable you to decide, so what do we mean by this word? You know, there's multiple ways of talking about it. Meta-linguistic negotiation. That's like, you know, over a person. What do we mean by a person? Well, some people feel this way. Other people like hate corporations being a person. But legally, corporations from the beginning have been considered legal persons. There's no way you can change the laws without totally disrupting all sorts of laws from the beginning of our country, basically, when corporations were made legal and so on. So they're persons. Forget trying to change that. Plus, there's a lot of things that aren't persons that have human characteristics, like a fetus. Whoa, a lot of states will allow you to kill a fetus, and yet it's absolutely horrible to think of yourself as killing a person. You're not killing a person. This is a fetus. It's not a person yet. Whoa. What makes it a person? This makes it a person. When you now have self-consciousness, you become a person. Because a requirement for you to be a person is to be self-reflective. A fetus isn't self-reflective yet. You have to have language to be self-reflective. This conceptual schema that you have of yourself is linguistic. And so you have to speak a language that enables you to have this app uploaded into your necktop. Right?
I like that.
That's not mine, by the way. It's A.C. Grayling. Maybe he got it from someone else, but he calls this computer your necktop, which is fun. And it's an app. I uploaded it, and there's folks. I think I mentioned Harold Bloom argues that who invented this app that humans started uploading? They call it the modern human. Who invented the human in that sense? That's Harold Bloom, and blames Shakespeare for that. So Harold Bloom. And I think if you don't remember, I mentioned that he's identified the very specific spot in Shakespeare's plays where he invents this, and that's Hamlet, where Hamlet has that self-reflection dialogue with himself, where he says to be or not to be, etc., right? A very important scene. And by the way, after that, more characters reflect on themselves. So Shakespeare, prior to Hamlet, doesn't do that, but starting with Hamlet does, and you get more individuals. Othello will talk, this way. So there's other characters that will be self-reflecting. And by the way, Descartes read Shakespeare, and so Descartes could have gotten some of his ideas from these plays. Although I think I mentioned Pope John Paul II blames Descartes for the modern conception of the modern self. His book on this very topic, memory and identity. And by the way, for John Paul II, right, he's dead now, right? Everyone knows. His blaming Descartes for this concept of the modern self, which is happening right here too, right? In Hegel, blames Descartes and that concept for how nasty people treat one another in the West. So the idea of the social contract as the legitimating theory for government, that we vote and we have rights and all that. You can't have that theory without the prior theory of the modern self, who are the citizens that have those rights and have those natural desires for liberty and freedom and property respectability, respect, etc. You're not worried about respect unless you have a concept of the self that needs it.
Good little robot.
And yeah, you've got billions of people in the world that may not have that app installed. So that's one of the problems, of course. And Fukuyama has talked about this in state building. When we're trying to create a new democracy in Afghanistan, it's not going to work, folks. Why? We don't have the raw materials that make citizens there, right? You first have to teach them a Western European language, probably have to teach them Christianity. So that's bad news for Islam. Islam is not a sufficient religious narrative to prepare an individual for having a self-consciousness. Is that right? I mean, that's theoretically part of this, right? So before you can become a modern European, you have to become a Christian. That's why, the one French philosopher right now is in trouble because he said that, and even one particular woman introduced herself, and he said to her, "Your parents did you a horrible turn by not naming you a Christian name. That's an insult to France," he said. Right? And if you think of it, whoa, that insults her, that insults Islam, that's against the law in France to do that. I wonder if I can find it. I bet not. I bet it won't. Maybe it will. Oh, that's him. Political journalist Eric Zemmour lives for scandal. Yet again, he is at the center of a media uproar after insulting what? Go away. Insulting a commentator on French television. On September 16th, Zemmour was invited to the famous TV show Le Terrien de Dimanche, Sunday Earthlings. Terrien, people that live on Earth. Right? Fun. Hosted by Thierry Ardens and featuring columnists from different social and political backgrounds. In an argument with Hapsatou Si, a French Senegalese TV host and one of the commentators, he told her that her parents shouldn't have named her Hapsatou. Later we learned the scene was cut by the producers, and Hapsatou Si decided to release the hidden part where he actually went a bit further. His statement was pretty clear. Her name is an insult to France. Names are a way to personify France's history. So the theory is that you've got to go through these stages, which Hegel defines as these various stages of history. And that kind of approach to history is also part of a Hegelian worldview. In fact, he criticized many of his contemporary professors for teaching Descartes and Aristotle right side by side as if they were competing. And he says you have to teach them in their milieu, in their situation, so that people can see, why they think the way they do. And that's certainly part of our approach today. We wouldn't think of teaching someone with just their ideas without trying to give a bit of a biographical relationship and time relationship so you can see why their thoughts were appropriate for them at that time. We talk about Jefferson, the slavery issue, anything you pick, we want to do that. But that's a Hegelian insight, that culture is evolving. There's such a thing as progress, comes also from Hegel in the sense that that this evolution is moving towards a better thing. So progress, right? Famously, every once in a while, progress seems to go backwards. You know, we can chalk that up to like the pendulum, you know, so like a lot of people, even last night in the discussion, you know, were saying, you know, well, we might think of, you know, the pendulum swung so far to the left with Obama's administration that there's this backlash, and now the pendulum is swinging way back over to the right. You know, so you know, if you know you think of history as progressing, it doesn't just progress following one particular side of the pendulum. It's how the pendulum keeps swinging and where it eventually takes us. So you go backwards. Remember, Lenin was a Marxist, and a Marxist is a Hegelian. So Lenin gives us Shag, Period, Va, Shaga, Nazad. Let's see if we find that. I did. This came close. So this is actually, that's not Lenin's book, is it? Is it Lenin? Maybe. Oh, it is. Okay. So yeah. So for a minute there, I thought someone wrote a new novel using the same. But yeah. So famous book written by Lenin. You know. So in order to progress, sometimes oddly you have to take 2 steps back. So Shag is a step. Period is forward. Dva Shaga 2 steps back. Nazad. You know. So that actually sounds pretty bad, really, if you think of it. Progress 2 steps back for every 1 step forward, that's not very progressive. So that's a book that is famous but also appears to be ironic when you apply it to the Soviet Union, which clearly went backwards.
Yeah.
By the way, is that impressive that I know Kak Gabriel Ruski Toshi? Is that interesting? I should capitalize on that more often, I suppose. Or not. I don't know. I saw a person in Freddy's the other day who had a t-shirt on, and it was, what it said on it was, "Ask me about my underwear." And I wasn't thinking fast enough because I wanted to ask him about his underwear, but I wanted to do it in a politically correct way, you know, because for one thing, he was a bigger guy, you know, it was the middle of the store. Sometimes that kind of thing is not really meant for you to follow its directions, and yet that would clearly be an icebreaker, you know, for the two of us. But it was Under Armour, so just noticing your Under Armour, you know, thing, because I guess they make underwear as well. But I'm not going to ask you about your underwear. What time is it? I need a quiz question? I feel like, yeah, we've got like 1 minute left, right? So, notice I've not even read into the second page of the article. And we didn't look at vindication of the rights of women at all. So what's a good quiz question? I know, ask the people on the camera. So what do you think is a good quiz question? Oh, that's a problem with the camera. They can't answer. I'll ask about Fukuyama. What do you think of his insight that it's this Hegelian focus on the need for respect, the need for people to appreciate me, that is at the heart of why women are so upset with the way men behave. The traditional role of the woman would clearly not have allowed them to come forward and criticize a Supreme Court nominee. A lot of people are saying how brave these women have been to come forward and to literally take the stand in the committee and discuss how they felt nearly being raped in a party and so on. Is that a good thing to ask you? How do you feel about that? Is it primarily that? Of course, this is just a theory. So I'm just asking a theory to explain why women have, I mean, that's the Me Too response. And it's not just this, the Kavanaugh thing, it's Harvey Weinstein, it's Charlie Rose, Bill Cosby.
Bill Clinton.
Which may come back to haunt him. You know, a lot of people are saying, hey, you know, Bill Clinton's well within this 30-year or 35-year time period. Why aren't some of these women coming forward and, you know, well, and obviously the critique there is that, well, he's a Democrat. This is a tool that's being used against Republicans.
You know, also that, whether it's true or not on Facebook, that every time someone comes up to become a witness against the Clintons, they disappear.
That too.
Yeah.
Although Monica is still out there writing books. And
Yeah.
the blue dress, I think, is in the Smithsonian. No, I don't know where this blue dress is.
It's on eBay.
It's on eBay. Oh, geez. Yeah, where is the blue dress? Where is Monica's blue dress?
That could be the good question.
Would that be better?
It'd be an interesting one.
Where is Monica's blue dress? Notice that question was already there. Oh!
Oh. You're spot on.
How did that happen? Oh my. Okay, so that's a good question. You might want to use it, though, to address the overall issue, though, and see what you want to say. Keep in mind that once you email it to me, I think I own the copyright to your... No, I don't. I'm not allowed to capitalize on student papers.
I'll put a note. You can use this. I'm giving you the rights.
Questions, thoughts? Is this fun? There's tons of stuff here. This material is so rich, and you know, I'm just bringing in a book where the index is full of references to Hegel. This is clearly apropos today, even though he died in 1831, and the phenomenology was published in 1807. All kinds of famous stuff associated with that. That's, I think, the same. 1812, I think, was when Beethoven wrote the Third Symphony. Is that right? Beethoven. Is this real fact, or is this just fake news?
It says satire on it.
Yeah.
Okay, because here it says, I find it very hard to swallow that the Republicans aren't behind this. Mrs. Clinton replied, no, that's not. That's got to be fake news.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not that we don't have enough.
This
of it.
isn't the Onion, is it?
No.
Real clear satire, right? I don't really know where the dress is. have no clue where that blue dress is. So this is,
The Washington Post.
this does not look like the Washington Post.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what. Doesn't look like real news.
It's getting harder to figure out what's real and what's not.
Hey, you know, we could trust Wikipedia. But I don't know. And by the way, that song, "The Devil with the Blue Dress On," that's not her, is it?
No, that's
That's a
older.
different- That's older.
That's probably
Mhm.
the 70s.
I used to listen to that kind of music, so I don't have as good a historical memory of where that stuff is from. I know she's got a new book out, relatively new. I don't read that kind of stuff. Actually, I do read some things. I read a book, biographical book about the life of one of the TV stars. I can't think of the title, but the title's a pun on her name. And she wrote it. It was basically just her own description of how she basically slept her way to the top.
Well, that sounds like what's her name?
She was, what's Murphy Brown? A TV show, Murphy Brown. She was the blonde Murphy Brown. What was her name?
I don't remember.
Not 2018. Candace.
Candace Bergen.
Doesn't seem right. I guess so. Yep, that's her. She wrote a book too.
Well, in Hollywood, there was a lot of that stuff going on, even from the old days.
Well, that was the tradition. So, you know, the idea of coming forward and complaining about what happened when you were a 15-year-old at a party 36 years later.
But they can't remember most of it. It's supposed to have been a traumatic thing, and can't remember most of it, you know. What made me upset was I saw that political ad on TV, and they said we're using the Ford made his words, and he was a veteran. I was scared he could kill me if he wanted to, and then I screamed and he covered my mouth. First off, he's 17 years old. You can't become a veteran when you're 17 years old unless you have your parents' permission. Second off, they basically pointed the fingers at all veterans when she said that, applying some kind of association to that. And I got upset with that. And on top of that, since it was not said in a courtroom, it's just hearsay, so guess what? Now that statement is not admissible in court. So it leads you to think that this is a ruse. Because if he really did those things, she should press charges and go that route. And then he should like just say,
Live long and
okay,
prosper.
I'm gonna spare the country this embarrassment and deal with this issue. And not be nominated until, of course, right now his career is ruined, whether he gets nominated or not, because there's no trust in him.
It looks like he will be nominated.
Whether he was guilty or not.
He will be.
Yeah, the FBI came out and said we didn't find anything, and then thorough, and the Democrats were like, well, we've had investigations and it come up with dirt. How come you didn't present it at any of the hearings that we had prior? If you had the dirt, you should have been able to present it. So they're just making stuff up, trying to get it, but he's like he is gonna get like this Republican.
Yeah, Murkowski is probably going to have to go with her party, and that's going to piss off a lot of people right here.
Yeah, but
Got a lot of friends that have been like traveling to DC to protest.
Yeah.
she was waiting for the evidence, basically, when the FBI came up, and the FBI couldn't find anything out of the ordinary. So she's like,
Going to put the pressure on her to approve.
yeah.
So I don't know. If he's guilty, really, if he really did that stuff, then yes, he should pay for